I can't really do an entire course on audio principles and audio mixing, but I'm going to do as much as I can and within what will fit onto the DVD, and just maybe get some some of the more important points. Uh, One of the things that I find really kind of stymies a lot of people is understanding a signal flow in a console or a DAW. And the old timers like me that have been around for a long time are used to working with big consoles. And, in consoles, you got row after row after row of things. And once you understand what one row does, and it'll be an equalizer and a bypass and a polarity reverse and a compressor, maybe if it's a fancy console, once you understand what one does, you understand what all of them do. And in the old days we had patch panels, and of course people still do, but and you had your hands on it. But a lot of people who are coming up now in the first exposure to recording equipment is with a DAW program like Sonar. It can be kind of bewildering, the signal flow. And I like to use the example of the parallel of home plumbing, because plumbing in a house or in an office building is exactly the same as signal flow through a mixer, a physical mixer, or a virtual mixer inside a DAW. A lot of faucets will have a separate knob for the hot water and for the cold water, but it gets mixed together and comes out a single spigot. And the same thing happens in a soda machine in a restaurant. When they put the soda under there and push the button for Coca-Cola, they get a mix of carbonated water and Coke syrup. And if there was such a thing as a soda machine that dispensed cherry Coke the old way, where you actually had Coke syrup and separate cherry syrup, that would be a three-way mixer. You're mixing three microphones to come out to a single place. This is exactly how it really does work, except that instead of water flowing through the pipes, it's audio signals going through the wires or through the circuits in internal workings and computer programming inside a program. And you can even take it further, because in a console or a mixer, a small mixer, a lot of times there's a microphone trim which sets the volume going in, and then that goes to the channel volume, which is also, all these are in a row in series. So first you go through this, and it goes through the channel volume, then it gets routed to the output, master left and right output, and then there's a master volume control. And this is very much like plumbing in the house, because in my basement, coming out of the hot water heater, there's a valve. You can turn it off in case of emergency. Then that comes upstairs, and under the sink, there's another valve. And, so if you have to take the faucet apart, you got to be able to turn it off there just for that one faucet. And that then comes to another volume control. All these things are in series at different stages, and you come to that control that actually is what controls what's coming out the faucet. So I like to use that analogy.
Ethan, two questions. When do you use a bus, and when do you know when to insert them into a channel, or how best to insert them in a channel?
Well, that's a great question, and this comes up a lot, because there was two ways you can add an effect to a track in a DAW program or in a hardware mixer, and that's either as a channel insert, or you can put it on the bus. Effects that add new content, like reverb or echo. When you have echo, it's actually adding echoes. You have hello, and the echo effect goes hello, 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 hello. And reverb is really echo. It's just a whole bunch of echoes, as opposed to an effect that does something to the sound. Like an equalizer changes the balance between bass, mid-range, and treble. Or a flanger effect also actually changes the frequency response, but in a unique way.
So back to new sounds, go to a bus. Things that affect the sound stay on the track.
That's really the best rule. And a compressor also does something. It doesn't add new content. It does something. It's an automatic volume control.
Keep it on the track.
And you put that on the track. Traditionally, reverbs have always been used on buses, even going back a long time ago, because a reverb unit like an EMT plate, which I used to have in my professional studio, that was expensive. This is in the late 70s. We paid, I think, $7,000 for that thing, And even before that, a lot of studios, and some still do, have live chambers. It's actually a live room with microphones and speakers in it to get reverb. Well, you can't have 17 of them, one for the singer, one for the snare drum, and one for each guitar. And it makes sense. So when you use a bus, it's actually a separate little mixer within a mixer that takes a sample of the guitar and a sample of the lead vocal and a sample of the snare drum, pre-mixes them, and sends them to the one reverb unit. And reverb units, most of them have a stereo output. They'll take a mono input and they give you stereo back. In a live room type, a real reverb room, there'll be a single speaker source at one end of the room, and there'll be two microphones in different places offset a little bit to give a stereo effect, and those would come back into the left and right speakers. And this, so that's an efficiency thing. You can't afford to buy 17 EMT plates or build 17 rooms, and the same kind of efficiency happens in a DAW program, because reverb is the most intensive effect of all the effects that you have.
CPU intensity, you mean? Or
Exactly. It takes a lot of coding, because a reverb is thousands of echoes per second. And every one of those has to be calculated for how loud it is, how much treble roll off it has. Because if all the echoes had full treble, it would sound really tinny and unnatural. Real reverb, as the sound decays, it also loses highs and loses treble. So that's a huge amount of calculating. And in fact, that's really the one place, I was talking before about why I like in the box versus out of the box. That's the one last frontier that they're getting close, but they're still not there, is reverb units. The in the box reverbs and the computer ones just don't sound quite as good, because they can't calculate enough echoes. A real room will have literally thousands of echoes in a second. And to calculate all that, that's all your computer would do. In fact, when you buy an expensive outboard, a Lexicon reverb or Sony reverb,
that's all they do.
Yeah, it's a whole computer in a box, and it doesn't have to also record and play back tracks and apply EQ. It just
calculates.
Exactly.
And so back to reverb should go on a bus.
Right. Reverb and echoes and anything that adds new content should go on the bus for efficiency and convenience. And things that process the sound. Really, the sound has to go through it. Because if you send it to a bus, if you have EQ and you boost the treble, but you do it through a bus, well, at the output you have some of the original without the boost, you have some with the boost, and it just gives you a mess. You're not really getting the focused effect that what you want.
Cool. And Ethan, just to complete or just loop back, is that the only reason why you like in the box?
There's so many reasons I could. Here's another 20-minute dissertation I could give.
Yeah.
But when I had my big professional studio in the late 70s, early 80s, I built my own console. It was a 16-input console. It had 12 input channels and 16 outputs. And it was a full console. I made it completely myself. It took like a year or two to design and almost a year to build. And because when you're mixing, and especially if you're one engineer, it's really hard to do a complicated mix, because you have to remember the guitar has to come up here when he plays the solo, then you have to come back down again. And the singer sang, when we punched in the singer on this one thing, it was a little too loud, so you got to bring that down like 2 dB for these 3 words. Professional mixing engineers are really good at it, but it's really hard, and it's not uncommon for a complicated session to have several assistants and maybe the bass player, all working faders and knowing that at this point in the song you have to bring this up, you have to bring this down. So when I designed this console, I put in what I think was a very unique feature. I actually didn't have slide pots for the outputs. I had rotary volumes, but I had 2 of them and a switch that would go between them. So I could have one preset volume for the guitar when he's not soloing, and then you flip the switch up and you switch to a different volume control. And of course, it didn't click. I mean, I designed that into the circuitry, so I could switch from one volume to another. But even then, it's really complicated, and you have to do the mix. And if it's a 5-minute song and you get everything perfect, and then the last 30 seconds you make a mistake,
right.
You got to start all over again at the beginning and rewind the tape and wait and cue it up and start. So to me, one of the overwhelming advantages of in the box is that you can draw your automation in. When you get to a spot, you're playing the mix and say, ooh, that syllable stuck out too much. You can drop the volume for literally one syllable. Or a lot of singers and voiceover people sometimes will drop the t or b or d sound at the end of a word, like a comment. And a professional voiceover will go, I would like to make a comment, and you emphasize that thing, or if the word ends with a D. But sometimes, and I've done that, you just don't do it well. So I'll go in there and I'll draw that up like 6 dB for that 1/4 of a second. And when you do that, you're done. And every time you play the song thereafter, or the piece, or whatever you're doing, that happens. And there's a huge amount of automation in television and in Rondo also. But, in reverbs that come up at the end of a thing. And I switch the EQ on and off because I go to a different kick drum sound in the California rock part of television.
But all that automation is coming from penciling in nodes and doing your mousing and getting your envelopes right. And what do you say about, oh, Chuck, that track fader stuff that people would like to sell you
Right.
for $2,000 to do it that way?
I prefer enormously using a mouse. I have no problem mixing with the mouse. It's not like you're sitting there trying to ride faders on 6 tracks at once, because you don't need to do that. You can deal with 1 track at a time. You hone in on it. You might spend an hour polishing a vocal performance and making sure that every syllable is clear, nothing is too loud. If it's a little sibilant on this one S or 2, 3 places, you drop it down. And then you're done. So I have no problem with that. And in fact, I'm amused at the resurgence of these devices, and these FireWire powered mixers that do this, and then Sonar and all the DAW programs, they have to have extra code to be able to read the things, and I think it's handled mostly as MIDI messages. And also that you can sit there and do this stuff that you had to do 30 years ago, but you don't have to do anymore. And
But it looks cool.
well, I guess it does. But if you look at my setup, I don't have room for that,
Yeah.
and I don't want to have room for that. And it's like people like Ed Zubak that are professional composers at their computer all the time. They have a keyboard right here in front of them. The computer keyboard's here, and the music keyboard is there, and that's what I should have. But I'm not a full-time guy. It's not a big deal for me to hit the record button and come over here and play. And if I'm doing something serious, I'll actually get up and sit down. That's not a big deal, and I can reach the computer keyboard from there
and get there.
But I still like to work efficiently. Another really great feature of In the Box is you reuse your plugins on multiple tracks. When I had my professional studio, we had a Gain Brain, we had a Keepex, we had an LA3A, we had a bunch of parametric equalizers. But when you buy a hardware device for however much it costs, you use it once on that one track. If you want to put another compressor on another track, you have to buy another compressor. Within the box, you have you buy your plugins or the plugins that came with your program, and you can use the same compressor 149 times if you want. I see people obsess over latency. That I just got this new driver that lets me get 1.5 milliseconds of latency. Nobody wants bad latency. And especially if you're sketching things as MIDI. And I record all of my things as MIDI and then replace them with live playing. I do that with my cello concerto. And when you're playing, it's very disconcerting to hit a key and a quarter second later you hear the note. But let's be realistic. If sound travels at about 1 foot per millisecond. So if I have a 10-foot guitar chord and I'm 10 feet away from a guitar amp, which is not uncommon if you're playing live somewhere, you can play. You're not hip. Well, that's 10 milliseconds of delay. Now, some DAW programs lie to you, and I have seen that. I've seen it say you have 8 milliseconds of latency. No, this is a lot more than that. But in truth, and I've used I have a 20-foot guitar chord, and I've been 20 feet from my guitar amp, and I can play fine. So even 20 milliseconds of latency. So I think I set the latency probably up to 50, 60 milliseconds for television when I'm mixing, and the CPU is hovering around 40, 50%,
Wow.
something like that.
Wow, you got a lot of headroom, a lot of place to go.
And I have 100 and something plugins. I mean, I got a lot of stuff happening on that, and a huge amount of processing and a lot of automation.
Yeah. What do you say to the people that go, hey, I'm an artist, man. I don't want to know computers that much. They confuse me. They're complicated, yada, yada. I just want to do my art.
Yeah, I just want to do my art. Yeah, no, that's a great question. I tell those people to buy a standalone hard disk recorder. Ultimately, it's much more flexible having a computer, and you can, if you don't like this compressor plugin, you buy another one, or there's a lot of choices, many more choices. But I've been a computer expert, I like to think, for many, many years. I used to be a contributing editor for PC Magazine. I was an expert programmer. So computers come naturally to me as well as the art. But I understand that people don't like that. A lot of people just don't think like that. They just don't like that, and they learn it grudgingly. But I will say that if you want to be a real expert audio engineer, you have to understand the science. And I don't just mean computers. You have to understand how audio works, how it really works, what's really happening, what the difference between voltage and current, what impedance means. Maybe you don't have to know it at an EE level, like a degreed circuit designer engineer would, but you have to you really need to know that, otherwise you will just never be successful. Well, there are people that are good at turning the knobs and making things sound good that don't understand the science, but I think it's an important skill to have, and I set up all my computers. I set up computers for all my friends. I remember when we bought, this was 3 Dells ago. I should mention Dell a little bit. I'm a big Dell fan, and a lot of people, in the news groups, especially if they have more ambition than money, say, oh, don't buy a Dell, you're just paying for the name and the advertising, which is true. You can build a computer and save, $500, which is true. But the great thing about Dells is they're really, really quiet. Now, I have, this thing has been running here this whole time, and this is, like as powerful as a Dell as they sell, I think, or at least in anything I was willing to pay for.
It's 80 some odd pounds of computing sitting there, right? It's a big machine.
It's a big machine, and they have all kinds of fancy stuff inside to make it quiet. And I do have some fiberglass behind there, so the fans are pointing into fiberglass, so it doesn't come back. But still, it's really quiet. I can sit here and and play guitar, cello, as I mentioned before. So I'm a big fan of Dells. 3 Dells back, you, me, and Doug Ferrara all bought the exact same computer, and I spent a week optimizing it for audio, all the tweaks, and really made that sing, and installed all the basic programs, got everything working really, really well. And then we had the session. We brought all 3 of our computers together, and we used Norton Ghost to clone my hard drive onto this one and then onto the other one.
That was so cool.
And I set up computers for a lot of people, a lot of friends. I don't so much have time for that now, but I've set up your computer. Doug now is an expert, and he sets up his own computers. But everybody that's a close friend of mine has had me at one time or another set up a computer for them.
They've been lucky.
And it's a valuable skill, because otherwise, if you don't know how to do that, you're going to be one of those sad sacks posting in the news group, man, I installed this latest update, and now I'm totally hosed, and I can't get it back, and I even went back to the restore point, and it doesn't work. I'm hosed. Well, you need to know how to organize a hard drive. You need to know how to make an image backup of the C drive. And even if you do all that, it's very important to have on your C drive, and I imagine there may be a similar principle for Macintoshes. I'm not familiar so much, but I use partitions a lot. All that's on my C drive partition is Windows operating system and all my programs. I have no data, not even the address book, which normally goes there.
Right.
And I moved that over to a data drive, and I have a separate partition for small data like Word doc files and PDFs I've downloaded, MIDI files, and what I call small data. I have another partition just for temporary internet files. I have a partition just for samples and loops and sound fonts. And the reason, and I know people say, well, you don't have to do that these days for performance. But I don't only do it for performance. I also do it for organization, because it's important to segregate files that fragment often, like temporary internet files, with files that don't fragment, like samples and sound fonts. If you have a 300 gigabyte drive, and at some point you're going to need to defrag it, or otherwise you're going to have problems,
right?
And you won't be able to play all the tracks, or you'll be recording and you'll get dropouts of stuff you recorded. So it takes like forever to defragment a 300 and something gig hard drive, as opposed to a 500 megabyte partition that I use for temporary internet files. And with my sound fonts, it's like 9 gigs, something like that. But you only do it once and never again. I mean, I hardly ever edit them anymore. So that kind of organization is very important. And I'm going to show some of my folders in a few moments. So besides organizing and optimizing a computer, really important is a backup strategy. And I have like 5 different computer hard drives here that I back up to, and I rotate. I don't back up to this one and then back up to that one again. I back up to that one and then to that one, because if a file gets corrupted while you're saving, who knows, a power glitch could happen. Something could happen. You've just overwritten your only backup. I have a backup of everything off premises at your house. I have another backup on a huge FireWire drive at Doug Ferrara's house. So if my house burns down, I haven't lost everything. Finally, every computer needs an uninterruptible power supply, an UPS. When we were doing the video shooting of television, we lost power like 3 or 4 times because of all the lights we have. After 20 minutes, the circuit breaker just gave out, but the computer is still going. It's beeping, but it's still going.
We had life to power down and save what we had going. Yeah. Ethan, digital organization. How'd you do it? I mean, what was the magic? I was here. I saw like thousands of WAV files, thousands of video clips, hours of tape. I want to say it's like, 20 tapes an hour each, and it's gigs and gigs at each tape. How did you organize things and keep track of it all?
Well, it's certainly not magic. It's just organizing. But I like the way you think. Yeah, well, the project is complicated as this. There's a lot of housekeeping. All the raw footage that we did. This is now the 16th session. This is our last video
Filming session, right? Yeah.
But right, and gigabytes upon gigabytes, 100 over 100 gigabytes of raw footage,
and dual cameras. So
and dual cameras. That's right.
Right.
So. On some of the stuff, right, there were 2 cameras, and at the end of each session, of course, we would bring it all in to the computer, and then the next day I would go through and pick what was good. And I use a program that you actually told me about called Easy Video Splitter. It's a shareware program, very affordable, and that lets you non-destructively take excerpts out of a thing. So if I had 5 takes of me trying to play the violin and look like I'm playing it right, I could find just the best one and take that to a separate file. And then I would call that violin take 1 or whatever, and would name the files and move them into different places. I also kept all the original raw footage in case I needed an option later. So far, I haven't had to go back to that. And I also burn everything to DVDs for backup. But so I give all the files meaningful names. I put them into their separate video under my television. I have a whole video partition. Under that, I have all my projects and the Real Traps videos I've done. And there's a television. And under that, there's like 5 different folders. One has just all the finished and trimmed video footage.
Okay.
And one has the stills, and they're all the different.
How'd you split your organization between guitars and violins and drums? Did you get into music folders at that or no?
No, just by the names. There's 350, I think, or a little more than that, separate video clips. Individual, and this is the trimmed ones, taken out. And there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of audio files, and it's the same thing. Now in Sonar, and I'm not sure how other DAW programs do it, but in Sonar, when you record, they make up this big long cryptic name that has the project name as part of the track name if you had track name and identifier and a bunch of stuff, and I don't find that useful. First of all, because I'm such a backup fanatic, I need to know what needs to be backed up, and I don't want to keep extra stuff in the project that I know I'm not going to use, outtakes and stuff. So I would typically loop a section. If I was going to just do a guitar improvising, I would just loop a section and record it all into the same track. Sonar has a fabulous feature that I think they call track lanes, where you have multiple subtracks within a single track, and I would just loop and create, sometimes like a dozen lanes, and you can go through, and each lane has its own mute and solo button, so you can find the best pieces. I would slide things around, make it, and keep this and put this part of that, and then I would switch over to that one, and you'd have all these little joins and splices, and then I would delete all the stuff I didn't care about, and I call it healing. I'm not sure what they call it. The word they use is bounce to clip.
Bounce to clip.
And then you end up with a single clean WAV file that just has the combined all these takes, and the file has some big long stupid name. I would then make a note of the name, quit Sonar, or close the project,
right,
and go in and change it to Guitar Solo 3, or Fuzzy Guitar, or Click Guitar, or whatever was a meaningful name for that, or Precision Bass 1, Rock Part, whatever. And then when you go back into Sonar and you open the project, it would say, I can't find XYZ. But then it says, well, what would you like to find it yourself? And I would say, yes, it's called Guitar 03. And then
slide that in and
so if you look at the folder organization, you'll see all these things with meaningful names, and it's only the actual good takes that are in this folder, and it's still hundreds and hundreds of megabytes. But then I can back that up to CD or to DVD and to other hard drives, and I don't have all this extra baggage of stuff that's not needed, and old takes and cryptic names, and you have no idea what the heck is going on.
Yeah.
So that's part of the organization.
Especially with a project of this magnitude,
Right. Huge project.
You got 1 or 2 tracks, no big deal. You can kind of get away with it, right? This case here is no way.
The last thing I want to talk about computer organization and management and housekeeping, and really it also falls under backup. I save all of my files, and I use sequential names. When I started on television, I had Television A, then I went to Television B. And by the time I got to Z and started to wrap around again, I said, oh, I'll erase the old ones. I said, I don't want to do that. So I ended up with literally 150 revs I ended up to. And then when I started in Vegas, I just said Television 001, Television 002. And, maybe at the end of after every hour, I would use save as to save a new name.
Okay.
And I've never lost work. I've never lost work. Both Sonar and Vegas are fabulous programs, really good and really stable. And I've never lost work. I can't emphasize that enough because I know a lot of people have lost work. But saving all the versions, I have everything and I zip them all up. So it's not like I have 150 files all sitting there in the thing. I have an archive.zip and, inside that. So I only have the last 3, 4, 5, whatever that I've been working on there. And then, once a week or so, I go stick them into the archive and delete all the things. But that way I can go back to any version. And if I say, oh man, I think I had that yesterday. What happened? And it's not that the program lost data, but I screwed something up and made a mistake, and all of a sudden this nice transition I had all worked out, it's not there anymore. I don't know what I did. I must have, hit the wrong thing.
Something happens. I'm going to also say it's not just that, Vegas and Cakewalk are great programs. It's also the optimization of the PC and keeping the operating system over here, the data drives over here, keeping the data drives optimized, and yada, yada. So they're good programs, but good housekeeping. That's kind of what you're hinting at, right?
Yes, yes, that's certainly true. And knowing what you're doing. And also, I'm a real big believer in if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I know people that are always chasing the latest upgrades and the latest drivers. And, when I bought this new computer, it was only a few months ago, I didn't take the old drivers that I had from the last time from my last computer. I went to the M-Audio site, and they indeed had a driver that was only a month old. So I said, well, okay, well, obviously I want that. But if something is working, I have Windows Update, automatic update completely disabled because my computer is working flawlessly. Yes. And I have a ghost image. Yes. And over the last month or so, as I've added a couple programs and made some changes, I'm going to run a new ghost in a couple of days. Because now, this has been fine for a month, but I even made a note of, since the last Ghost backup, I added this, I installed this, I changed the preset for this, and keep it documented.
That's what I've been doing too.
And it doesn't take a long time to do.
Little text files, you were saying, do little readmes, ethanreadme.txt, exactly. And put it in the folder. Hey, what about some of the automatic backup programs? The Mac stores come, one-touch drives that back up this way. I mean, binary backup with Ghost, is that the end all, be all way?
I prefer to do it manually. I use a program called SyncBack, which is fabulous. It's freeware. It's so good that I bought their $30 Pro version, but it was more complicated. I didn't find it as intuitive, so I was glad to give them the $30. It's a great program. I use it every day. I back up to all my different sections, and depending on what I'm working on.
Okay. And then you do Ghosts.
Well, the Ghost is only once in a while. I mean, it's only after you've made a major change and installed a bunch of new programs.
Okay.
But the whole point of keeping that separate, if you have everything in one partition and you do a backup and then you find that something is corrupted and you have to reinstall Windows, well, you're also reinstalling and overwriting all your data with the old data. So with a Ghost backup, you might do it once a year.
Yeah.
And if something gets corrupted, and I never get viruses because I have a hardware firewall, but if something, who knows, something goes wrong, I can get myself back to where I was a year ago or 6 months ago or whenever, which is fine, but I haven't brought my data back to where I was 6 months ago. I still have everything. And so that's very important to keep data and the operating system and programs separate. I want to talk a little bit about what matters with audio and what doesn't matter. I see people obsess over things that don't matter at all, like jitter. That's 120 dB below the music and masked by the music. While the music is playing, the stuff is literally down into the noise floor, way down into the noise floor. And people obsess over that, and they obsess over all kinds of things, all the while ignoring the acoustics of their room. And I know I talked about the importance of that. But, a typical, project studio size mixing control room has, peaks and nulls, like 6 of them often, a peak, a null, a peak, a null, a peak, a null. spanning 30 dB, and people ignore that. They don't know about it. They don't want to know, so they obsess over so many other things. So I want to talk about what matters about audio, and there are only 4 parameters that matter. There's 4 things that define everything possible in audio. One of those is frequency response, how evenly, well, everybody knows what frequency response is, but you don't want, if you record something through a microphone, you want it to have however much bass and mid-range and treble was on the original, and from the instrument, that's what you want to come out. So there's frequency response, there's noise, which is background hiss, and hum and buzz is a subset of that. There's distortion, and there's several kinds of distortion, but the 2 common ones are harmonic distortion, THD, which is total harmonic distortion, and IMD, intermodulation distortion. That requires 2 frequencies in order to happen, and the 2 always go hand in hand together. Whenever you have harmonic distortion, you also have intermodulation distortion, assuming music and multiple frequencies. But even speech has multiple frequencies, and even a single note on a cello or a violin has multiple frequencies because there are the harmonics. And intermodulation distortion is very unpleasant. And it's kind of humorous when I hear people arguing about, tubes versus a solid state, that the tubes have more even harmonics, which is musically pleasing, and the solid state has odd harmonics. First of all, that's wrong, because and anything that distorts is going to give you both kinds of distortion. It's going to give you all of those. Yes, you could contrive a circuit that has more evens and more odds, but generally speaking, when you drive something into distortion, like turning up your guitar amp, you're going to get both. You might get a buzzier distortion, and there certainly is a difference between the way tubes distort and the way solid state distorts. But when you're talking about a preamp, you're not looking for a fuzz tone effect. You're looking for a clean reproduction. And as long as the harmonics and the distortion, the added artifacts, are soft enough, then it's not going to be a problem. You're not going to hear it. What really matters is the top 20 or 30, maybe 40 dB. And what happens below that is much less important. So we have frequency response, we have noise, we have distortion, and the last artifact is timing errors. On a record, if you have an old turntable and the hole sometimes would be off center, you would get what's called a wow, where the pitch slowly goes up and down, up and down. There's flutter, which is unique to analog tape recorders, where it's the same kind of a thing. The pitch goes up and down, but it's really fast. It's a warbling kind of thing. And digital audio has jitter, which, again, in modern equipment is just a non-issue. It's completely non-issue. And that's it. That's all that matters with audio, are those 4 parameters. You can define everything that happens in a circuit, in a microphone, even in a room, though, of course, room also have a time-based factor of echoes and reverb. But that's really different because that happens outside of the equipment, not inside the equipment. One of my favorite quotes of all time was by EQ magazine editor Craig Anderton, where he said, "No listener gives a damn what mic pre you used." I'm not going to presume to tell people what they should spend their money on. But the people that I'm most interested in reaching are the ones that don't have unlimited money.
Right.
And one of the most popular threads I see in the forums, and I'm very active in a lot of forums, is, "I got $2,000 coming back from the IRS. What should I upgrade?" And they have some big long list of equipment. I got this mic, and I got this compressor, and I got this kind of mixer, and I got this, And so here's what I'm thinking of getting. And they list another mic pre and another mic and another, outboard compressor. And almost never do they talk about room acoustics. And I've been on this kick since like the 70s.
Do you say the same thing about like guitars and instruments?
Well, that's really different. All instruments are different. Even 6 different Martin guitars off the assembly line. They're all going to be different because wood is an organic thing. They're all different. Mm-hmm. Now there are cellos and basses and violins made out of composite materials, and those can be all the same. I mean, if you're making something out of phenolic plastic, everyone will be the same. But living, breathing things, and flutes maybe are not so variable. Though I know a fellow who plays the bassoon, and he said that a contrabassoon, which is like a bass bassoon, he says everyone is different, and they're all out of tune at the high notes, and and you have to learn how to overblow and underblow because they're all different. So musical instruments do vary, and instruments, especially string instruments, violins and cellos and violas, are prized for their unique character, and And that's actually the next thing that I want to touch on
Segue into.
is
Okay.
is show a spectrum analysis of some instruments. And I'm going to play my cello, and I also want to do a thing with the guitar, and we're going to do that in a moment. The low C string on a cello is 65.4 hertz, but a cello body cannot reproduce that. This cello is around, I think, 95 hertz. The lowest, that's the body resonance. And I know that because I had to EQ that when I did a cello rondo, and I was doing the kick drum part and pounding on it, and that's where all the tone was, and I had to EQ a lot of that out. And we'll look at that more when we examine the tracks of that. So most of what you're hearing is not 65 hertz, and the same with the piano. Piano is a really very thin instrument, and you hear people say, "Oh, the low note on the piano is 18 hertz and 23 hertz, and you need speakers that get down there." There's very, very little content there. There's just about none on a cello at 65 hertz, even though that is technically the fundamental of the string. And we're going to look at a spectrum analysis of the C string here on the cello.
And while we're yapping, I mean, this is an original Telecaster that you bought in the 70s. Did you say that right? 72 or something like that, and that there was a different one in 68 that you wanted to get that you didn't get, or?
No, I love this guitar. This is a great guitar. I'm really bad with dates.
Okay.
I don't remember exactly what year I got. I know that it missed being pre-CBS by like a year. Not that I care. But everybody says, it's like the vintage plastic bags, But this has been a fabulous guitar. Soon after I got it, I put in this humbucking pickup instead of the kind of wimpy rhythm pickup that it came with. So just like with the cello, with a plucked string, especially in a case like this, there's no resonating body. Really, what's happened, all the body and neck are there for is to provide a very rigid and stable mounting for the string. And the string really is just vibrating by itself. There's no body resonance. And there's less fundamental than second harmonic. And we're going to look at this on the spectrum analysis in SoundForge. It shows, you can see exactly how much content on one string is at each of the harmonics and the fundamental. String. And now I'll do the same thing with the bass, and this is plugged in direct, and we'll show the spectrum analysis of this. This low A string is 55 hertz technically, but what you're really hearing is 110 hertz. And if you play an octave higher, then what you're hearing more of is 220. So here's the open E string. So I hope this has been an educational and informative discussion about audio and acoustics and computer organization and all the things we've touched on. And now I'm going to show all of the tracks one by one, or not all of them, but I'm going to show many of the tracks in Sonar and Vegas for these video projects and really get into the nitty-gritty. And you can watch over my shoulder as we do this.